Okay, Fox News alert from California, where Governor Gavin Newsom is set to release 8,000 prisoners by the end of August. It's an effort to slow the spread of the coronavirus among inmates and prison staff. But could it put the public at risk? Let's bring in our panel. GOPEC Chairman David Avella and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall. David, to you first.
As states have their budgets fall out of the bottom, you're going to see more states do this. You see Illinois has adopted similar policies, Virginia, New York. It becomes a big issue for states. It was already an issue for states. In a state like Kansas, 30% of prison guards were turning over every year because of low morale, low salaries. This only is going to make all of that worse. And as we get closer to the election and security continues ticking up as a concern for voters, hopefully, every debate a candidate goes to, they're going to be asked this question: what are you going to do to make communities safer?
Leslie, does this put the communities at risk? 8,000 prisoners. To be sure, these are prisoners that were either set to be released early or they're at high risk of contracting the virus.
Absolutely. This comes down to a humanitarian effort, because this was not just those on the left or family members of these prisoners crying out for some type of help. Remember, with the transfers, San Quentin alone had 1,000 increased cases. You're looking at people over 60 years of age. You're looking at people who are not largely violent offenders with 180 days or less, mostly, left in their incarceration. In addition to that, Sandra, what people forget is when somebody has an underlying health condition, or they are elderly, over 60 years of age, as an example, when they are in prison and they get COVID and they end up being very ill, they also go to the ICU, and that is also an additional burden to the overburdened hospitals with the surge that we're seeing in our state here in California. The governor is governor to all citizens, and that includes those who live behind bars.
Leslie, I'm not sure if you answered the question. Does this put the communities at risk for those prisoners that are being released? But I want to move on, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seems to be making excuses for the uptick in violence.
Leslie,
is that okay by you to make the case that the uptick in violence that we're seeing here is tied to those who need bread?
Clearly, it's not just that. There are some people who, out of desperation, will loot. We've seen that historically throughout the world. But there are also people who take advantage of a situation, and we've seen that with those who choose to loot rather than to peacefully protest, which the majority of protesters throughout the country have done. There are many factors that weigh into this. There are more guns. A lot of people want to say, oh, it's less police, but statistically, having less police doesn't lead to more crime. Statistically, almost every city, New York included, has higher crime in the summer. And of course, right now, when you just look at numbers, though, Sandra, those that have been released for gun offenses, less than 1% of those have been linked to these crimes that have been committed in New York City by a gun. So I don't buy AOC, but it does weigh in what she's saying to the entire equation of why there's an uptick in violent crime in the city.
You're making the case it's a factor. I don't know that she stated it in that way, David, but I'll get your response as we do look at the uptick in shootings, violence as a whole in New York City. The police saying this past weekend up 600%.
Every time a member of the squad opens their mouth, a swing state Democrat goes, oh my gosh, they're talking again. As Americans want to make sure that their economic and their personal security is taken care of, what the squad and those on the left have done is taken a movement that was ultimately about getting rid of corrupt, bad cops and turned it into pushing a progressive agenda that ultimately you're going to see, as you have seen, police get defunded. You see job-killing Green New Deal being talked about again. We talk about everything except what's actually going to move us forward. And for me, Congresswoman Cortez should continue talking.
Okay. Leslie, last topic, Goya. Did you support the boycott Goya movement because the CEO went to the president, to the White House, visited the president, heaped praise on him as a leader, and then there were calls to boycott because it seems to be backfiring a bit now. The CEO, refused to apologize, and now there are calls for a boycott. of Goya Foods. And the Wall Street Journal's writing about the Goya paranoia this morning after he refused to apologize, the CEO. They wrote his remarks to President Trump only appear partisan through the jaundiced lens of resistance progressivism. He was offering polite words of commendation to his host, the President of the United States, but such are the paranoid times in which we live. Leslie.
I think it's freedom of speech all around. A CEO of a corporation such as Goya or any other has a choice if they want to go out there with how they feel about a president or any political leader. And those who are consumers have the free choice and the freedom of speech, if you will, with their dollar to buy or not to buy or to boycott. Technically, Sandra, most boycotts don't last and don't succeed. And the reason for that is we as Americans have very short-term memories. Interestingly enough, Goya is purchased largely by the Hispanic community, who are largely Democrats.
David?
Goya is going to be just fine because they produce tasty food. Just as go to downtown Manhattan on any given day and the line around the corner at Chick-fil-A is quite long. Good food is bought by consumers. The bigger point here, though, is that at what point does the cancel culture ultimately die out because everybody's offended by what everybody says and nobody wants to be part of it? Because they're ultimately being made fun of or being told they're wrong. No one wants to be part of a culture that says everything you do is offensive and everything you do is wrong. If this continues to be the movement of the cancel culture, it's going to be short-lived, and I say bring on the short-livedness of this cancel culture.
All right, you guys got us started on this Monday morning. Thanks to both of you, David and Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you.